The day Mom dropped me off at Dad's felt like a punishment. She barely slowed down in the driveway, engine still running, tapping the steering wheel like she couldn't wait to leave. I climbed out with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, heart pounding. Dad stood in the doorway wiping his hands on a dirty rag, looking just as thrilled as Mom. "Hey, kid," he said, voice rough from years of cigarettes or maybe just from life. "Hey," I mumbled. The silence between us was so thick it felt like a third person standing awkwardly there. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years, and now I was supposed to live with him all summer. Awesome. Mom gave a little wave, never even turning off the car, and drove off down the cracked suburban street. Dust rose behind her tires. I followed Dad inside. The house smelled like old wood and motor oil. The kitchen was cluttered with unopened mail, fast food wrappers, and empty beer bottles. He led me down a narrow hallway to a small bedroom with a bare mattress, a crooked lamp, and a busted desk missing a drawer. "This'll do," he said. Then he left me there, standing alone with my bag and a hollow feeling in my chest. The first week was hell. Meals were eaten in silence. Breakfast was gas station coffee and stale donuts. Dinner was usually whatever Dad could microwave or pick up from the drive-thru. We barely spoke. When we did, it was short, clumsy sentences. I stayed in my room, texting my friends back home, scrolling mindlessly through social media, wishing myself anywhere else. Dad spent all his time in the garage, the low hum of a radio leaking into the house. One night, desperate to break the boredom, I wandered out to find him. That's when I saw it, hidden under a dusty tarp, a massive, rusted old van. I yanked the tarp down and coughed at the cloud of dust. "That old thing," Dad said, appearing behind me. '79 Ford Econoline. Took me across the whole damn country once. His voice softened for a second, full of something I couldn't place. Pride maybe. Or regret. "Does it still run?" I asked. "Dead as a doornail," he said, lighting a cigarette. "Might be fun to tinker with, though." That night, instead of stewing in my room, I stayed up Googling van restorations, old road trip routes, anything to distract myself. The next morning, Dad was already in the garage when I came out, holding 2 mugs of black coffee. He shoved one toward me without a word. I took it, the hot ceramic burning my fingers a little, but it felt weirdly good. We spent that day covered in grease, prying open the van's stubborn hood and arguing over socket wrenches. It was the most we'd talked since I'd gotten there. As we worked, something shiny caught my eye under the driver's seat. I reached down and pulled it out, a small silver locket, tarnished and dirty. I flicked it open. Inside was a photo, Dad, younger, smiling bigger than I'd ever seen, his arm wrapped around a woman who wasn't Mom. And they were kissing. My throat tightened. I shoved the locket into my pocket before Dad could notice. That night, lying in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, I kept turning the locket over in my hand. Who was she? And why did he still have this? I didn't know it yet, but finding that locket was about to change everything between us. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the locket. Every time Dad handed me a tool or barked out an order, I wondered if he had any idea what I'd found. I tucked it deeper into my pocket and focused on the van, trying to drown out the questions screaming in my head. Over the next few days, the awkwardness between us faded, replaced by the clatter of wrenches and the occasional grunt of approval when I actually did something right. We spent hours in that dusty garage, crawling under the van, scraping away years of rust, cursing at stubborn bolts. Somewhere along the way, the van stopped feeling like junk and started feeling like a project we both needed. One night, after wrestling with a busted starter motor, Dad leaned against the hood, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Ever think about just getting out of here?" he asked. "Like hitting the road?" I shrugged. "Never really thought about it." "Why?" He looked at the van like he was seeing a ghost. "Used to be a dream of mine. Driving Route 66. No map. No plans. Just go." Something in his voice tugged at me, raw and real. "We could do it," he said, half smiling. "If we get this piece of junk running, maybe we could take a trip. See the world outside these 4 walls." I should have laughed it off. Should have reminded him we barely knew how to have a conversation without it ending in a fight. But instead, I heard myself say, "Yeah, let's do it." His whole face changed, lighting up in a way that made him look 10 years younger. We worked harder after that, both of us chasing something neither of us could quite name. I caught glimpses of the guy Mom used to talk about when she wasn't angry, adventurous, funny, full of big ideas. But late at night, when the house was silent and the only light came from the moon outside my window, I pulled out the locket. I needed answers. I flipped it open again and studied the woman's face, dark hair, bright eyes, someone who looked like she belonged in a different life. My curiosity gnawed at me until I finally gave in. Using my phone, I searched Dad's name and anything I could think of: old addresses, court records. That's when I found it. An old legal notice buried deep online. Custody battle. Dad had fought for full custody of me when I was 5 and lost. The woman in the photo? She wasn't just a random girlfriend. She was supposed to be my stepmom. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering. Why had no one ever told me this? Why had Mom acted like Dad didn't care? I thought about asking him right then, storming into his room, demanding the truth. But something held me back. If he'd hidden this for so long, what else hadn't he told me? I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun rose, I made a decision. I would go on this trip. I would get the answers. One way or another. But as I stepped into the garage that morning, ready to play along, Dad was standing by the van, his face pale. He held my phone in his hand. "You've been looking into me, huh?" he said, voice low and dangerous. My stomach dropped. The secret wasn't mine anymore. And neither was the plan. I froze, my mouth opening and closing like I'd forgotten how to speak. Dad tossed my phone onto the workbench like it burned him. For a second, I thought he was gonna yell, throw a wrench across the garage, maybe kick me out. But he didn't. He just leaned back against the van and stared at me with this look, not angry, not even surprised. Just tired. "You found the court papers," he said flatly. "The locket too, I bet." I nodded, heart hammering in my chest. He wiped his face with his sleeve, smearing grease across his forehead. "Guess I should have expected it. You're smarter than I gave you credit for." I waited for him to explain, to say anything, but he just stood there, letting the silence stretch until it nearly suffocated me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally choked out. "Why didn't anyone?" Dad picked up a wrench and turned it over in his hand like he needed something to do. "Because it was easier that way. For your mom. For me. Hell, maybe even for you." I felt the anger rise in my throat, hot and bitter. "You fought for me. And you lost. And then you just disappeared." He flinched like I'd hit him. "It wasn't that simple," he said. "I wasn't the guy the court wanted you with. I didn't have the right job, the right house. Your mom's lawyers made sure everyone knew it." His voice cracked, the first real crack I'd heard since I got there. "I thought maybe staying away would make it easier for you. If I wasn't around to confuse you, maybe you'd have a normal life." "Well, guess what?" I snapped, my voice shaking. "It didn't work." He laughed bitterly. "Yeah. Figured that out when you showed up with that look in your eye. Same one I had when I left town at your age." For a long moment, we just stood there, two strangers stitched together by blood and old mistakes. Then he sighed and said, "We can still take the trip. You and me. Maybe it's not too late to fix some of it." I didn't know whether to scream or hug him. So I did neither. I just nodded once. We spent the rest of the day fixing the last few things on the van in near silence. That night, as we packed ratty sleeping bags and cheap gas station snacks into the back, Dad finally broke the quiet. "There's one thing you need to know," he said, voice low. "Before we go." I turned to him, heart thudding. "The woman in the locket," he said. "Jules. She wasn't just gonna be your stepmom. She was gonna have a baby. Your brother." My mind reeled. Brother? I had a brother? Or I would have. I opened my mouth to ask 1,000 questions, but Dad just shook his head. "She's gone," he said. "Accident." Before any of it could happen. He turned back to the van, his shoulders hunched like the words had physically hurt to say. I stood there, numb, watching him. The past was way messier than I'd ever imagined. And we hadn't even left town yet. The next morning, before sunrise, we rolled out of the driveway. Dad behind the wheel, me riding shotgun, the van shuddering but moving. As we crossed the city limits, leaving the broken pieces behind, I felt a flicker of something strange. Hope, maybe? For the first time, I wondered if the summer wouldn't be a disaster after all. But just 2 hours into the trip, when we stopped for gas at a dusty station off the highway, I caught Dad standing at the payphone, talking in hushed tones. And I heard one word that made my blood run cold: run. I ducked behind the ice machine, heart slamming against my ribs. Dad's voice was sharp, tense, the way it got when he was holding something back. "I'm telling you," he said into the cracked receiver, "we're already gone. No one's gonna find us. Just handle it." I held my breath until my lungs burned. Who was he talking to? Who was he hiding from? The second he hung up, I sprinted back to the van and pretended to be checking the tire pressure. Dad slid behind the wheel a minute later, whistling off-key like nothing had happened. "You ready to roll, kid?" he asked, flashing a grin. I nodded, forcing a smile, but my hands were shaking. As we drove deeper into the middle of nowhere, mile after mile of empty fields and crumbling billboards, a sick feeling gnawed at my gut. The questions piled up faster than the miles. Was he running from a person? Debt? Something worse? The van's engine coughed and sputtered, but it kept going. just like Dad, pushing forward without looking back. We hit the outskirts of a ghost town by sunset. The kind of place you see in old horror movies, one gas station, one diner, and a bunch of empty houses with broken windows. Dad insisted we stop for the night. Cheaper than a motel, he said, parking behind an abandoned church. We spread out sleeping bags in the back of the van, but sleep didn't come easy. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind howl through the broken windows. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps crunching outside. Slow. Deliberate. My body went rigid. I poked Dad. He opened his eyes instantly, alert. We stayed frozen, listening. More footsteps. Closer this time. Then a low voice, almost a growl, "You can't hide forever, Bill." Dad's real name. Not Dad. Bill. My heart nearly stopped. Dad or Bill pressed a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay silent. He reached under his sleeping bag and pulled out something that gleamed in the moonlight, a tire iron. Not much against whoever was out there, but better than nothing. The van's thin metal walls offered no real protection. Another voice joined the first one, harsher, angrier. "You owe us. You think you can skip town and pretend it's all good." I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could vanish. Dad crouched by the back doors, ready to spring. For a second, I thought he was going to open them and fight. But then the voices drifted away, their footsteps fading into the night. Dad stayed tense for a long time before finally exhaling. "Get some sleep," he whispered. "We leave at first light." But there was no sleeping after that. Not for me. Not when the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My dad wasn't just trying to reconnect with me this summer. He was dragging me into whatever trouble he'd spent half his life running from. And worst of all, I wasn't sure I even wanted to go back home anymore. We left the ghost town before the sun had even burned off the mist. Dad drove with white knuckles wrapped around the wheel, staring straight ahead like the road itself might betray him. I sat stiff in the passenger seat, pretending to sleep but watching him through half-closed eyes. We didn't speak for hours. The old van rattled over potholes and cracks, the only sound besides the low hum of country radio barely leaking from the speakers. Around noon, we pulled into a diner shaped like a giant chrome bullet. I followed Dad inside, nerves buzzing. Over greasy burgers and flat sodas, he finally broke the silence. "Those guys," he said, voice low. "They're old business. Not your problem." "Yeah?" I said, sharper than I meant to. "Sure sounded like my problem last night." He leaned back, scrubbing a hand over his stubble. "I made some mistakes a long time ago. Dumb choices. Thought they were behind me." "What kind of mistakes?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Dad's jaw tightened. "Let's just say I trusted the wrong people." "Oh, the wrong people." "It wasn't anything violent, if that's what you're thinking." He hesitated. "Mostly." My stomach twisted. "Mostly." "You could have just told me," I said, voice cracking. "I didn't sign up to be part of your mess." "You're not part of it," he said fiercely. "You're my son. That's all that matters." But I wasn't so sure anymore. Back on the road, the miles blurred past again. Dust storms chased us across the desert. Abandoned towns flickered by like broken teeth. Somewhere along the way, the van started coughing worse than before. Dad kept banging the dashboard like that would help, but the temperature gauge inched higher and higher. "We need to find somewhere to stop," I said, panicked. Dad just shook his head. "Few more miles. I know a guy." Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, we pulled into a tiny garage in the middle of nowhere, the sign swinging crookedly in the wind. "Stay here," Dad said. "I'll handle it." But the second he got out, a stocky man in greasy coveralls stormed out of the building. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough. "You got some nerve showing your face here," the guy hissed. Dad held up his hands. "Just need a patch job, Joe. No trouble." Joe spit into the dirt. "You'll get nothing unless you settle up. You still owe for the last time." My heart raced. I opened the van door, about to yell, when Joe grabbed Dad by the collar and shoved him hard against the hood. Dad didn't fight back. He just said, "Please. It's not about me anymore. It's about the kid." Joe sneered, glanced at the van, and for a second, a long, terrifying second, I thought he was going to drag me out and use me to settle whatever ancient debt Dad owed. Instead, he muttered something and stomped back into the shop. Dad slid behind the wheel again, wincing. "He'll fix it. We just have to wait." "And then what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We just keep running?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew the answer already. As the sun started to set, painting the desert in bloody reds and golds, Dad slumped over the steering wheel. "You know," he said softly, "I wasn't running from you all these years. I was running from who I became after I lost you." I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time I saw not a villain, not a deadbeat, but a man who had been broken long before I ever got the chance to know him. Maybe that's what made it hurt worse. Maybe that's why I didn't see the car pull up behind us until it was too late. Two men stepped out, their faces shadowed by the setting sun. And they were walking straight toward our van. Dad jolted upright, eyes flashing panic for the first time since this nightmare began. "Stay down," he hissed. I ducked instinctively as he shoved the keys into the ignition. The van sputtered, coughed, stalled. Come on, he growled, twisting the key again. The engine roared to life just as one of the men pounded on the passenger side window with the butt of a gun. I screamed. Dad threw the van into reverse, tires screaming against the cracked asphalt, fishtailing wildly as we tore backward out of the garage lot. Shots rang out 2, maybe 3, echoing across the empty desert. Something punched through the back window with a sickening pop. Glass exploded everywhere. I ducked lower, heart thundering in my ears. Dad didn't stop. He spun the wheel, gunned the engine, and we peeled out onto the empty highway, dust swallowing the rearview mirror. We drove blind for what felt like forever, weaving through the dusky heat waves, neither of us speaking. When Dad finally pulled over miles later, the van shuddering in protest, we both just sat there, breathing hard. Blood trickled from a gash on his arm, but he didn't even look at it. "You okay?" he rasped. I nodded even though I wasn't sure it was true. I wasn't sure about anything anymore. "We can't outrun this forever," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He closed his eyes. "I know." Silence stretched between us, heavy as concrete. Then, to my shock, he pulled out his wallet and tossed it onto my lap. Inside was a folded-up envelope, thick, worn at the corners. "If something happens to me," he said, "you take this. You go straight to the address inside. They'll know what to do." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a name I didn't recognize, an address across the country, and a thick wad of cash. "Who are they?" I asked. "Family," he said simply. "People who still owe me and now you." Before I could ask more, headlights flared behind us. "Too close. Too fast. Hold on," Dad shouted, slamming the van into gear. We roared forward, the van rattling like it would fall apart any second. The other car gave chase, its high beams cutting through the dark like knives. Dad jerked the wheel, swerving onto a side road I hadn't even seen. Gravel and dust exploded behind us. The chase was chaos, sharp turns, narrow passes, the van barely holding together. But somehow, by some miracle or sheer dumb luck, we lost them. For now. Hours later, parked under the shelter of an abandoned bridge, Dad finally turned to me. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "You deserve better than this," he said hoarsely. "Better than me." I didn't know what to say. I was angry. I was scared. But mostly, I was tired of running. "We're in this together," I said, surprising even myself. He laughed, a broken, grateful sound. "Yeah, kid. I guess we are." As I drifted to sleep in the back of the van, the battered locket still tucked safely in my pocket, I realized something. This wasn't the summer I wanted. It was the summer I needed. Somewhere along Route 66, between the wreckage of the past and the unknowns ahead, we weren't just trying to fix a van. We were fixing each other. The road between us wasn't broken anymore. It had just begun. A year later, the van still sits in Dad's driveway, sun-bleached and battered, but somehow proud. Like it knows what we survived. We never finished the full Route 66 trip. Never made it to the Pacific like we'd promised each other on those first starry nights. Life got messy, as it does. The past caught up. Some debts had to be paid. Some mistakes had to be faced. But Dad didn't run again. Neither did I. We stayed. We built something out of the wreckage, something messy, imperfect, real. Some weekends, we'll throw a couple bags in the van, pick a direction, and just drive until the map stops making sense. No big plans, no destination. Just a father and son who found their way back to each other the hard way. And maybe that's the only way that matters. The road didn't save us. We saved ourselves.